The leadership aspect of integrity, I mentioned authenticity earlier. It's quite
Yep.
difficult to do that without integrity.
Yep.
My approach to leadership is all built on, building trust, building respect, the empathetic side of it, the understanding and putting the people first. And if you don't have integrity, most of those things will fall down very quickly.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform. I'm delighted to be joined today by someone who's not that far from me, actually, just down the road in Guildford, and whose podcast I've had the pleasure of being on in the past. We have host of Leading with Integrity podcast. Welcome to the show today, David Hatch.
Well, thank you for having me, Paul. And it's lovely to be able to return the favour, as you were such an excellent guest for me. I hope I do half as good a job as you did.
I'm sure you will. That was a fascinating conversation. I'll put the link to that show in the show notes here as well, if people want to have a look at what happened when the tables were turned. So, right, let's kick things off with a bit of your backstory then. What got you to where you are today?
This might be too long of a story, so you might have to tell me to stop halfway through. So I guess it started as it does for a lot of people, with the school journey. That I went to uni, did an apparently random subject of politics with international studies, which at the time felt like the right thing to do. In hindsight now, probably could have done without spending a year learning about the EU. That's largely useless to me now, living in the UK, but never mind. Graduated the year of the financial crisis, by which I mean 2008, because there's been so many of them since.
Yep, the original, old school.
Indeed, yeah, the first. Failed to join the Air Force for various reasons, largely timing, I think, and yeah, I wasn't fit enough, if I'm honest.
Right.
Did a few temp and contract roles for big-ish corporations and local offices that they had around the place. Decided that probably wasn't for me. I didn't really like that sort of company.
Yep.
And then, more by luck than judgment, fell into the aerospace industry, working for a small consulting firm, which had its ups and downs. But what I loved about it was the small business aspect, the feeling like you have a bigger impact and that everything you do can affect the whole company, and you can see the impact of what you're doing, which you really don't get in a big company, in my experience anyway. And it also has the virtue of more interesting work, particularly because the industry aligned well with what I was interested in, but also it's quite varied, because part of being in a small business is you end up picking up whatever needs doing, whether it's your job in inverted commas or not. So that let me get involved in all sorts of weird and wonderful things. We did things like we were working on a big legal case with a law firm in London, providing aviation expert witnesses, which was interesting, depressing at times as well, because it involved a crash and there was some deaths involved and that sort of thing, but really interesting to learn the process behind things like that. And then at the other end of the scale, we at one point bought an inventory of aircraft spares, and so we were literally like rivet salesmen for a while.
Right.
And there was such a volume of stuff as well that everyone had to pitch in, because we would have had no hope of shifting it otherwise. And so the things you learn from doing that are amazing, about sort of process and business and sales and quality, project management, all of that. And I ended up working at that company for a decade or so, as a result of which I had the opportunity to get involved in the foundation of a new space company, which at the time was quite rare in the UK. I think we were probably the only like fully UK space company at the time in this sector anyway. I mean, there's people building satellites and stuff like that, which we weren't. If you ignore companies like Airbus and the big multinationals who open an office in a country and then claim they're a UK company when they're a multinational. So we'll ignore people like that.
when it benefits them for tax purposes.
Well, yes, cynically, yes, you're probably right there. But certainly in the sector we were in, which was Earth observation, so satellite imaging, there's quite a few of them now, but at the time we were quite new to the party as a country.
Brilliant.
Yeah, which was great. And somewhere in there, I picked up a load of qualifications in like project management and quality control and a few leadership things, and began what I now see as a lifelong journey of learning about leadership.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess you want to hear a bit more about the space company now, don't you?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, knowing you, having listened to a number of your podcasts, which are always awesome, and you always talk about your passion for space and and sci-fi and all sorts of bits and pieces in between. But what was it that drove that passion for space and aviation in the first place? Do you think? Is there anything that got you into that?
Probably two different things, actually. So, I mean, the aerospace, the aviation, that side of it. Growing up, my dad had a pilot's license, so I was flying pretty much from when I could walk. Don't tell mum, no. Yeah, so there was that. We were always hanging around airfields and pushing airplanes around and stuff like that, which I loved, always did.
Yeah.
Inevitably, that led me to joining the Air Cadets, hence the Air Force angle later as well.
Yeah.
And also that kind of sparked the initial interest in leadership as well, was seeing that. And at the time, I didn't realise actually that the Air Cadets taught leadership pretty badly in terms of you're teaching sort of the 50s understanding of what military leadership is like to teenagers, I guess.
Command and control for
yeah, which in a business setting, I now know, having tried it, doesn't work at all. Yeah, and then the space side, I guess, mum was a Trekkie growing up, so watching Star Trek from almost as early as I can remember, and then Star Wars, obviously, and then later on it was Stargate, SG-1. Yeah, I could rattle off all of the big sci-fis. Yeah, I won't, but
oh, brilliant! I think that's it's a really important thing. I speak to a lot of people. I do some career coaching and things like that, and it's like connecting with the things that you're passionate about and finding, is there a way that you can connect that with the career that you're trying to drive? It doesn't have to be. It can be something that, recognizing, if you recognize that's a passion for you, if you can't do it in your career, then actually how do you get that passion fanned and flamed outside of your career as well? But if you can combine the two, then often it's a win-win for everyone. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really do it on purpose, though. It was kind of a happy accident. I mean, the aerospace thing, it was literally just a job ad in the paper. I wasn't really even looking for it. Someone else showed it to me. Yeah. And then the space thing wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been already working at that company. So
I'll do you the dignity of not asking you to explain for the younger audience what a job ad in a paper is. But
thanks. Yeah. Or what a paper is, frankly.
Exactly. Oh, fantastic. So that's led you on then to what you're doing today. And I know you've got the consulting company, you've also got the podcast. Tell us a bit more about what you do today in terms of who you help and how you help them.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, a bit more background about the space industry piece, maybe, because that sort of led me into the company today. And I call it a company because legally it is a company, but actually it's just me, if I'm honest. I'm a solopreneur. Yeah. So I mean, the space bit we really got into probably at the wrong time, I think. At the time we did, it was back in 2015. There'd been a really high profile company in the States. It was a small startup. They'd built like 2 satellites at the time, I think, and then Google bought them for 500 million.
Wow.
And so we were like, wow, if they could do it, we could do it. We couldn't do it. I can tell you, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But at the time, that part of the industry in particular, there was a lot of attention on it. And so it felt like we were in an exciting, cutting edge thing. We were entering a market with big potential, and it thought it was going to be amazing. And so our point of difference was going to be video from space.
Okay.
Which sounds pretty cool, yes? Video, yeah. The problem is neither we nor anyone else really knew what the use cases were for video from space, because nobody else had done it yet. So, and when you brought it down, actually, without giving away too many trade secrets, it's far enough removed now, it was years ago, but when you really boil it down, because of the characteristics of low Earth orbit and where these satellites have to be in order to work and balance the cost and the size and all that other boring technical stuff, what you really got to was maybe a minute or so of video before the satellite was too far over the horizon and couldn't point at your target anymore. So I don't know about you. I mean, can you think of any worthwhile, potentially valuable applications in that context of like 60 seconds ish?
I need 60 seconds of video at a very for a very specific position on the globe for a very short period of time.
Yeah, we certainly struggled. And it turns out, there was a pretty big reason why the majority of the industry was focused on still imagery. Yeah.
Right.
So as a result of that, about halfway through my time at the company, it was decided we needed to pivot into software.
Okay.
And I mean, the original plan, we were going to be, what do they call it? Like a vertically integrated or full spectrum bit, some clever marketing phrase that I can't remember. Yeah. But it was about doing like the whole market share, if you like. So the upstream in having and controlling satellites, the midstream, which was a clumsy phrase that I don't really like, but we'll go with it, which was like operating the satellites, because that's a whole piece in itself.
Right.
And then the sort of the downstream of applying what you're getting from the satellites into something useful for customers.
Right.
All of which sounded great. And there's a very big collection there of really interesting ideas that we completely failed or certainly struggled to implement or get any real traction. And the reason I'm boring you with this story is that there were a lot of lessons there.
Right.
I think the biggest lesson that I took away from it, from a business point of view, was about having the market and the customer need before you try to build the thing.
Right.
And I think there's a trap of a lot of tech companies that fall into is building it first. Like the old Field of Dreams thing, if you build it, they will come.
Yep.
You can't worry about finding the right customer later. That's what I've learned from that experience, really, is you've got to find that need first and then develop your solution to solve that problem. Because the truth of it is, if you build it first, they might not come.
Yep. No, I think that's a lesson that is so applicable in all sorts of areas. And I remember one of my previous guests, Jono Petrahidos, he was talking about that from a sort of online course perspective. You know, I'd previously fallen into the trap. I built an online course, put it out there, and hopefully people will buy it. And it's got some traction and it's got good. But actually, the approach that he'd done so well off is building that desire, understanding what actually is this really a demand? Is that there? And then off the back of that, starting to solve those problems. And I think that's such an applicable piece beyond just that space use case.
Yeah, and the real tragedy of it is it's so easy to do, and we've all done it. You get really excited about this idea that you have, and you can see the value of it. You're like, oh, this is going to be so great. It's going to be so exciting. And then you get it to market, or you put it in front of a potential customer and it completely falls flat.
Right.
And then that's a real knock to the confidence, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said about the ability to be passionate about what you're doing, really get into what you're doing, but also be able to separate yourself from that ability for feedback and for, this isn't working. You've got to be objective in terms of, are we actually achieving what we set out to achieve, whilst having that personal connection? And I think that's a real balance that a lot of people, particularly in small businesses, because it is so personal. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge. So you got a lot of experience, and so I take it from that world. What were your leadership experiences that led you more to the sort of what you're doing today?
Yeah, this is where I have to try really hard not to just get into a negative rant, because it was quite a painful experience at the time.
Right.
So, I mean, alongside the kind of the product and the market and the technical challenges we had, there were also some pretty big strategic issues, I guess I would call it.
Right.
Around trying to raise investment. I mean, launching satellites is pretty expensive.
I'd imagine,
the price of the satellite itself is, I mean, for us, it was going to be maybe half of the cost. Getting them in orbit is the other half. And it's mind-blowing sums of money, even for relatively small ones that we were looking at.
Right.
We probably got the timing a bit wrong as well. We got all excited about the Google thing back in 2015, but then we didn't realistically go out properly for investment for a couple of years. So, we'd missed it. And then by that point, the world had changed. The economy had moved on. It wasn't the best time to be trying to get funding for this massive hardware project,
right.
particularly because quite a lot of rockets were blowing up at that point as well. So it's quite high risk.
Yeah.
And then the company itself was also having some difficulties with leadership and organizational culture and a host of related issues that are probably sadly familiar to everyone who's listening. Anyone who's ever had a job, anyway.
Yes. Yeah. And what were some of the key sort of learnings, either from the negative experiences, or maybe there might be a few positive ones scattered in amongst that stick with you today?
Ooh. I think it's kind of positive and negative. I think it really comes down to recognizing the value of your people.
Right.
I think, I mean, with the title of this podcast is helping people perform, isn't it? And I think the big thing you've got to get right at the earliest stage of that is making sure they understand that you recognize the value they're bringing to your organization. If you want them to perform, they've got to feel valued. They've got to feel like they're recognized, they're heard, they're understood, and that you're there to help them as much as they are to deliver a benefit and output for you. I think that's where so many managers go wrong, so many CEOs, not just ones I've worked for, honest. And it's a sadly familiar story in terms of people getting it wrong. But then I'm quite lucky doing the podcast that I do now, being able to hear stories of people getting it right as well. And I love hearing those, because it's just, it's so nice to hear that it isn't just a horrible thing that everyone gets wrong.
Yeah. And I think it strikes me, if you ask most leaders if they care and value their people, care for and value their people, they'll say yes. Of course we do. Very few that will say no, or they're just a number to me. Whereas if you ask people, do they feel cared for? Do they feel valued? Then you get a completely other end of the spectrum. And I think the main thing that I've picked up over the years is it's got to be a frequent demonstration at an individual level as well. It's like, why do I care and value you for what you're doing and what you're bringing? And do I understand you and your motivations, what your life is outside of this office space, so that I can, connect back to what that is as well. So, and it's not I mean, what are your experiences there? You had any good experiences in that side, or?
Yeah, I've had good and bad. I think the real difficulty with it is being, and this is a buzzword I know that everyone hears on social media all the time, but is doing it authentically.
Yeah.
And there is a knack to that, I think, because and I think back to one manager I had who he'd obviously recognized that there was something important there, and that you should be, touching base with people frequently. So every time he came into the office, he'd walk around every desk and talk to every person. Now, on the superficial side, that looks like it should be the right thing to do, that couldn't possibly have a negative impact. But the problem with it was he asked every single person the same question.
Right.
His eyes glazed over, or he'd start texting and he wouldn't really listen to the answer. And as soon as they'd finished speaking, he'd just go, "Thanks, great. See you next time," and move on to the next person. And so it gave this really it was a sour taste in the mouth, maybe certainly for me anyway. But I think a lot of people saw through that and they realised that he's going through the motions. And it's particularly the asking everyone the same question bit. That was the real killer, I think.
and I think it's one of those bits where if you're all in separate rooms and you're all asked the same question, you wouldn't know it. But when that context of walking around, you can almost, in my mind, I can almost see someone there with a tick box and like, David's done. Let's move on to Paul.
That's it. That's it.
Ask my questions. I've done my leadership. Fantastic.
Yeah, and it felt contrived because it was. So, whereas the other end of the scale, a completely different leader I worked with, he would have a similar thing, except he wouldn't literally just do it all in one go and go around all the desks, but he'd make sure he'd kind of put himself in a position to have a conversation with people at least once a week. So he wouldn't just do it every time or every person all at once. He would remember what he'd spoken about last time. He'd start the conversation by asking a question about something he knows you're interested in, or about your family by name. How was, Susie's school play last week, something like that. And he'd remember it all.
Yeah.
And that was, it's chalk and cheese.
Yeah. And so this has led you, I guess, onto the podcast and the ability. So what first got you into the world of podcasting, and tell us a bit more about Leading with Integrity?
Yeah. So I guess it came out of lockdown, really, the whole COVID of it all. I think having that passion for leadership, having been something that I was interested in since I was a teenager, but then also when I left my last company and then started the new one, that was only about 5 months before the first lockdown. So again, my timing was excellent. I'm just really pleased with that. No, obviously not. But hindsight's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think, it was. leadership was always something I wanted to get into the business and start doing something. It was something I was passionate about. It was something I cared about. I'd studied it and experienced it enough that I felt fairly confident that I could help people.
Right.
And then it just kind of needed the impetus to actually make me do something about it. And so one of the lockdowns was, pretty crushing, actually, the timing of it. And I think it was one of the later ones, maybe 2021, I think it probably was. And I needed something to do. And then one of the platforms that I was on for some of my marketing work added a podcast function. I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I mean, I could do a podcast. I'm sat here on my own anyway. I'll just get a microphone. And so that's what it was. Again, there's a lot more luck than judgment, no real planning to it, which is the terrible message to send to people, I know. But it was needs must. It was a Save David's Sanity project, is what it was.
Right. And you chose the title Leading with Integrity. So tell us about what the show focuses on and who you speak to. And I know it is an interview format. Do you do any other formats alongside that, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly interview. I've done a few solo episodes over the years. I did a little mini series of them. September last year, I think it was.
Right.
Had a few with multiple guests, which are always fun to manage as a host.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've attempted those, but
yeah, I've done a couple of sort of partners, 2 people at once, and then I'm setting something up for later this year where I've got 3 people, industry experts who know each other, and that'll be later this year. But that's going to be an exciting one to manage more than anything.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed them, but it does feel. Maybe it's just in my head, but it does feel slightly more stressful.
Right.
But yeah, it's quite good. I think just have fewer questions and just ask everyone in turn is the way it works to me. Anyway. And then Leading with Integrity, the name kind of came out of, and this might tell you a bit more about former bosses as well, actually. But when I started the company originally, its tagline was Delivering with Integrity.
Right.
And that integrity piece has always been quite important to me. Particularly from sort of a PR perspective of certain things that former companies have said, which on the inside I knew weren't true, and things like that. And then obviously the leadership aspect of integrity. I mentioned authenticity earlier. It's quite difficult to do that without integrity. My approach to leadership is all built on, building trust, building respect, the empathetic side of it, the understanding and putting the people first. And if you don't have integrity, most of those things will fall down very quickly, because it's one of those things that humans can just naturally pick up on. Like if you're not being 100% truthful or honest or authentic, I mean, the phrase human lie detector exists for a reason, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, definitely people pick up on that. And so apart from amazing guests like myself,
of course,
what sort of guests do you typically talk to? What sort of range of people have you got on the show?
So I guess it's a combination, or variety is probably a better word, of leadership coaches, people like yourself, CEOs and founders, people who've been through that whole journey themselves, and so we can learn from their experiences. And then kind of just experts in their field, or people who don't quite fit in either of those boxes but still have really interesting leadership stories to tell. So one of those that stands out was a guy called Jeff Morgan, who is now a reformed former criminal, but in his youth he was a bank robber and he spent all this time in prison, whereas now he helps people turn their lives around. He teaches them all about leadership and why that matters and why it's important, and so his insights are really great. And I mean, I've had some really good ones. Fighter pilot, Polar Explorer, that was a really interesting one as well.
Brilliant.
Anyway.
No, I mean, I've listened to a few. There's always some. What I love about the podcast, I mean, podcasts in general, but your show's full of just those tips as to what can you pick up on, what can you do. Because I think if you don't, give your audience something in terms of what can you do with this. This is a great story, but how do you actually apply it to yourself, and how do you feel value? And that's a wonderful thing to share with people. So
I'm pleased to hear
it. And on top of that, you've got your consulting company as well, and you work with clients. What sort of clients do you typically work with, and how are you helping them?
I mean, quite a long question to answer again. I'll do my best. Yeah, I guess that from the whole experience with that startup journey, I think there were kind of two things that it awoke in me, if you like, or underlined for me. One was the leadership side of it.
Yep.
Leadership does matter. It does make a difference. It's not just a nice to have soft skill. It's essential, I think, to success, and quite often its absence is the cause of failure. That's certainly been my experience anyway. But secondly, what I took from it was that I really enjoy working in those kind of high-tech startup environments where the goal is something worthwhile and important as well, not just doing it to make money.
Yeah.
And so when I set up on my own, the first thing I started offering was project management services, because it was what I was most qualified in at the time. And it felt like it would be easier to sell, in the short term. With everything that was going on in the world, that was quite a priority for me at the time.
Right.
And so, yeah, when I set up on my own, that was kind of the first thing I started offering, both at the kind of the strategic program level and then the more day-to-day project operations level, I guess you would call it. And with what I'd been doing up till then, it felt natural to stick in the space industry, and I've kept that going even today, on and off, through the last 4 years or so. Wow, it's more than 4 years now. That's flown by. Anyway,
yeah, it does fly by.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very picky about the kind of projects I get involved in now. It's got to be
right.
I've got to find it interesting. It's got to have something in there that I'm going to care about. Otherwise, I'm not just going to do it for the paycheck.
And I know you've got a community piece as well. So tell us a bit more about the sort of online community side.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the leadership and how I help people, there's two ways. It's the podcast, which I'm determined to keep free for everyone for as long as I possibly can, because hopefully that way the most people will benefit from it.
Yep.
And then my real focus this year is on trying to build this online community. So it's called Integrity Leaders. It's fully online. It's very low cost. In fact, there's a 60-day free trial right now.
Yeah, fantastic.
And the idea is that it will give people access to leadership development that they won't otherwise be able to get. So we do live sessions. We've got a few short courses. There's a community and networking aspect to it as well, and helping you meet new leaders, new managers, people in a similar stage of their career as you. Because again, leadership can be quite a lonely experience sometimes, especially when you're doing it for the first time. And it is isolating. People feel unsupported quite a lot. So it's giving you kind of that sympathetic ear, if you like, and access to people who can understand you and have that conversation around things that you're struggling with, but without feeling maybe the stress of talking to someone at work, at the office about it, because that has a whole set of problems to it as well, doesn't it?
Ah, wonderful. So we'll make sure we got the link definitely to that community, and we'll share that with people. And I do encourage people just to go and check these things out and see if it's for you. And this sounds like an amazing way to get some of that high level leadership training that you would generally, or certainly in my experience, typically get off a big course that either costs a lot of money or is invested by a big business or something along those lines. And this is a much more efficient and fun way in a lot of ways to connect and build up your leadership skills. So kudos to you for setting that up, sir.
Well, yeah, thank you. And yeah, I hope so. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. Is most of the kind of the leadership development, these big executive leadership programs, executive coaching, it's not really aimed at those first timers, the new manager, even first time company founders who won't have the money to spend on things like that. And so that was kind of my logic, was make something a bit more affordable.
Right.
Because and it is a source of immense frustration to me that most of those leadership programs are targeted at the people at the top of the organization.
Yeah.
I'm not disputing they need leadership development. Of course, everyone does. But in terms of who's interacting with the actual people doing the job and the work of the company, it's those new managers, isn't it? Those are the people who most need urgent leadership development.
Yeah. Don't give them leadership development 10, 15 years down the line when they're already made their way up to a senior leadership role. Let's make sure we get that at the grassroots level.
Exactly. And by that point as well, with any bad habits they've got are so firmly entrenched that, you'd have to spend millions on training probably to get that out of them.
Brilliant. So let's have a think, maybe switch this up a little bit in terms of how do you help yourself perform? What are the things that you do that keep you on top of your game?
That's a good question. So obviously I'm a member of several communities. I listen to loads of podcasts. And I'm spending loads of money on training all the time. No, obviously I'm not doing that, because being a small business owner, I'm not always in the position to. But yeah, I mean, joking aside, I am in a few communities that help me with skills that I'm lacking. So a big one for me is around the marketing and the messaging. That's not something in my career before that I ever had to do, so I don't understand it. I don't know how it works. So I do need support there. And then from the business owner aspect, I'm very fortunate in that I have quite a good network of former colleagues and people I've met at networking events over the years who are in very much the same position as me. In quite a few cases, they're further down the journey, so they've got more experience, which I can learn from. And I do my best to talk to them as often as I can without annoying them, which is the real knack.
I mean, the thing that surprised me in my journey, because I've been employed the majority of my career, and then going into this self-employed world, is if you just ask and put the question out there, people want to help and people want to share their experiences and share their stories. So it's something I always encourage people to help them get, and don't underestimate the power that helps the individual who's helping you as well. So there is a win-win for everyone there.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I think I mean, that's why I feel quite fortunate to have a short list of people I can just phone up and ask for advice, because especially as a solopreneur, sometimes you can get a bit lonely, and you do miss that office environment sometimes, and having those people around you can just pick their brains at the drop of a hat. And it can be, so it is very good, not just for what you're trying to do or for your development, but for your mental health sometimes as well, to just have someone to listen.
Yeah, fantastic. And let's ask you a couple of quick fire questions here. So if you've got this skill set, you've got this experience, who would you want to help if you could help any individual, team, or organization to help them perform? Well, who would you want that to be?
I mean, thinking of a named individual is difficult, but anyone who is struggling as a new manager, they've been dropped in at the deep end. They're struggling to swim, and no one's helping them. Someone like that. In terms of an organisation or company, I guess anyone who's trying to change the world for the better, and leadership is holding them back for whatever reason.
Oh, wonderful stuff. And let's flip it on its head a little bit in terms of, if you could sit down and have a drink, have a coffee, have a meal with somebody and just chat to them that you believe could really help you up your game and help your performance, who would you want that to be?
I think there's a couple of people, but I'm gonna go with, for two different reasons. One is to answer a question, and the other is just because I think it'd be really interesting to meet and talk to these people. An astronaut.
Yeah.
Anyone, doesn't matter. I mean, somebody like Chris Hadfield, the Canadian guy who's quite famous for his rendition of Space Oddity, whether he was on the International Space Station, or Tim Peake. Buzz Aldrin would be interesting, but I feel like I wouldn't get within a mile of him. Something like that, just because they've got such a unique perspective on the world. Literally, like you could count on your hands probably. I don't know, showing my lack of preparation there, but it's not a long list of people who've been in the position they've been in and had that perspective on the Earth as a whole.
No, wonderful.
But also, they're such high performers to have got to that point in their careers as well. So they must have so much knowledge and wisdom to share. So
they're certainly a unique bunch, and something that I think we could all learn from. So great answer. And finally, then, if people want to reach out, they want to learn about your podcast, they want to learn about your community, where do they go to connect with you, to connect with the work that you do?
Well, there's a website, which is www.leadernotaboss.com. And that will let them sign up for my newsletter. You can also then get an invite to join the community if you'd like to, or just give it a trial, see if it's for you or not. You can also find me on LinkedIn and follow me there. Everything about the podcast, that's pretty much all I post about these days. So if you're interested in that, that's where you'll find it.
Brilliant. And yeah, as always, I do encourage the audience to go out and check out, other people's podcasts and the work that they're doing, because there's some amazing work. And do reach out and connect. And you never know where these conversations are going to take you next. So, been fascinating, David, and I'm wishing you the best of luck for the great work that you're doing. And thanks for being on the show today, David Hatch.
Well, likewise. Thanks so much for having me, Paul. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.